Hello and welcome to the Mitchell Law Tea Break. I'm Catrin Mitchell and I'm joined by my colleague Catrin Jenett from our lovely new offices at Hayward House. Today we are talking about redundancy processes and avoiding unfair dismissal and other claims. Obviously we're living in very uncertain times and many businesses have been struggling with a challenging economic situation for many months now. We've seen increasing numbers of long established high street names going to the wall. There are a few businesses which aren't having to think about some degree of belt tightening.
Yes, and they do tend to hit the headlines when they go spectacularly wrong. For our purposes today though, are we just talking about businesses who need to lose jobs because they're in crisis?
No, and any business is obviously entitled to restructure itself to stay competitive and reach its objectives. And there are changes it can make to the workforce which are short of redundancy, and we'll look at those, as well as formal restructures which result in job losses. To embark on that and make sure any redundancies are fair, you do have to show that the statutory definition of redundancy is met.
Which is?
Well, there are three strands and you might be relying on any of them. They all broadly lead to a reduction in numbers. So either the business is closing altogether, and that's obviously the most straightforward to explain. One of the sites is closing and you propose to lose all the jobs at that site. Or the third, that you just want to reorganise the way the work is done and you need fewer people in particular jobs as a result.
So where do we start? I wanted to reshape the workforce and save staff costs. What do I do first?
Well, broadly, decide what you want the new structure to look like. If you're closing a site and making changes to other parts of the business, it's a matter of planning out how things will look at the end, and as well as how things will be managed during the transition phase.
Yes, the upheaval of a redundancy process can often be overlooked in the focus on how the future looks. There are ways of managing this, aren't there? So that you minimise the disruption caused to staff and your business doesn't grind to a halt.
Yes, and I think there's a lot to be said for spending much of the planning process in focusing on how you manage the communications, and you can limit the inevitable stress and worry by being very clear with staff what's going to happen, by designing a good consultation process and only putting the minimum necessary people at risk.
So you don't need to put everyone at risk?
No, if you're reducing a team of 20 to a team of 10, if you design the process right, you can limit the uncertainty to those who are most likely to go. Important if you have a production line to keep going on a 24-hour-a-day basis.
Communications then. Shall we begin with the announcement?
Yes, well firstly there does need to be a wider announcement to the business. But what that says and how it will be made will depend on the scale of the restructure and the numbers affected.
So if you're losing a few jobs in one team, it probably isn't necessary to call a meeting with the whole workforce. But if it's much wider, there's more of a job to do with preparing people.
Yes, and not just inside the business. If you're planning to lose more than 20 people, there's the HR1 form to be submitted to the Secretary of State for Business and so on.
Yes, easy to miss that one, and it does take time to plan. The consultation obligations will also determine how long the process should take. Depending on how many people are involved, it could be many months before the redundancies can be put into effect.
Yeah, in a significant exercise with 100 employees or more, the collective consultation alone will take 45 days. Add into that the preparatory phases and the need to elect employee representatives if you don't already have them, then the individual consultation on top.
Yes, although to some extent the collective and the individual consultation could be designed so that they run in parallel. As we said earlier, it's all about the planning, and it's also a case of looking at how you're bound by any contractual redundancy process which may be in place, either formally or because despite the absence of a formal policy, the way redundancy is approached in your business is so well established that it's now custom and practice.
And now we're getting into complex territory. Should we try and keep it a bit simple? We've made a general announcement that we need to make changes and we may be losing jobs. What happens next?
We start consulting. If we believe the changes are going to result in more than 20 people going, we need to consult collectively first. If there is a recognised union, you can consult with the union. If you have staff reps who have specifically been elected to deal with matters such as this, you can consult with them. If there are no reps, the first job is for the staff to elect them, which will involve nominations, ballots and so on. a process for which you're going to need to allow time.
Yes, and once they're elected, we can then start to consult with them. How long does that take?
Well, as we've said, it depends on how many people are affected. You also need to factor in particular issues such as shift working, which might present challenges in communication with those involved.
So what's the point of consultation?
It's all about looking at whether the redundancies can be avoided. The unions or the individual staff might have other suggestions for ways of reorganising which doesn't result in any job loss. So they might suggest reductions in the working week, sabbaticals, different shift patterns and so on. The business is under an obligation to consider the suggestions, although ultimately it's management which is going to decide whether they are workable.
Yeah, and then we have to consult with the individuals themselves. How long do we need to allow for that?
So we need to consult so it's meaningful. In general, you're going to need a couple of weeks at least to allow for the at-risk meeting, at least one consultation meeting and a dismissal meeting if there are no alternatives found.
Okay, so having gone through the collective stage, a business is clear that it needs to reduce a team of 20 to a team of 10. How does it decide who goes?
Well, once the pool of potential candidates is identified, which can be fairly wide if you're established that there are numbers of people who do a fairly similar role, you're likely to be looking at a selection process. Although there are other methods if the restructure is significant, and sometimes you might be adopting a process closest to a recruitment exercise.
Yeah, but going back to a more conventional process and selecting those at risk, gone are the days of last in, first out, aren't they?
Well, you say that, but I don't think they're completely gone. I've seen small businesses adopt such an approach. It can be a blunt instrument and perhaps loses an opportunity to keep those who are most likely to help the business succeed in the future.
Yes, so those are the people who have the skills, knowledge and experience, and a more sophisticated selection process will focus on those criteria as opposed to length of service.
Yes, length of service can be used with discretion. The risk there is that it might open up claims for age discrimination. Similarly, a blunt focus on attendance might discriminate against a staff with a disability who has had to take time off. Sensible criteria can include knowledge, skills, qualifications, performance and conduct. Be clear about how the candidates are scored and try to put in place some robustness in the process so that two people do the scoring.
Yes, and before we wind up, my other tips are to make sure you've organised all the paperwork at the beginning of the process. I think get the timeline ready, get the letters ready, the invitations to the meetings, the confirmation of the various stages, so that you're clear when you're in the process. And this really helps when there are bumps in the road. Not everything goes to plan.
Yes, the road up to the point of dismissal for redundancy is stressful for all concerned. Good planning, clear focus and an eye on the end point are the most important elements. We've been involved in many restructuring processes and have plenty more helpful hints to keep the risks and the disruption as low as possible.
Yes, and that's it for this tea break. So contact us if you'd like to talk about a redundancy process or a restructuring exercise. But for the meantime, thanks very much. Join us again soon.